Good afternoon. In the true tradition of the African Union, bonjour, bon dia, assalamu alaikum, to make sure we can greet you in all the languages of our dear institutions. I will actually miss the opportunity to ask you to give a big round of applause to Mr. Barak for his incredible passion and sense of hope he created for his statement. So join me and say a big round of applause to Barak. I am beginning to believe there's something associated with the name Barack Obama. I'm almost tempted when I get home to change the name of my son to now be Barak as opposed to what it is today. But again, for the sense of hope, it is incredible to listen to a young ambassador tell us exactly what we need to do to make sure we can be part of the solution. Let me begin also by recognizing the leadership of Deputy Chairperson of the African Union. I have the privilege of working with her and knowing behind the scene the leadership that she displays in making sure climate finance works for Africa. And her presence here, it's not by accident, it's really a testimony of her leadership. I also want to recognize the ED, the Executive Director of ECA, and I also had the privilege of working with him and seeing the efforts he put forward in making sure we are fully coordinated as Africa, but also the UN and the African Union actually works hand in hand. Last but not least, the African Development Bank, for all the initiative they take on a daily basis, making sure we have access to climate finance, and that is something to be lauded and something to be respected, but also to be recognized as such. Let me make a couple of points. First of all, starting with the problems that we're trying to address. I am sure it's been said time and time again in your conversation that Africa contributes less to climate change, but nevertheless, our people actually do suffer from the drought in the Sahel, from the drought in the Horn of Africa, from the flood in other parts of Africa. There's a human face to climate change, which lead to food insecurity, but also affecting the livelihood of many Africans. So I think it's important before we begin too technical to be reminded on a daily basis that we're actually addressing an issue that affects the lives of many Africans across the continent. It's really important we take that into account so we can actually be impactful, but also come up with something that will affect the life of Africans across the continent. Second, I was delighted to hear that your conference is trying to work on the nexus of development and climate change. Now, I am old enough to remember in 1992 in Rio, the first conference of the United Nations on development and environment was meant to actually address the nexus between the two. So fast forward almost 30 years later, we're still having the same conversation. And I hope we will get reminded as we get to the summit for Africa, it's not just about climate change, it's about poverty reduction, it's about sustainability, and these are issues that are equally important to the African continent. So whatever comes out of your conference that we can actually suggest to the summit, to link the two, it will go a long way in actually underscoring the importance of those two going hand in hand. I think third, now that the African Union is in the room, let me recognize also the Commission who is working in green economy, in rural development, in other aspects of climate change that are equally important, just to demonstrate that Africa is not just on the waiting mood. We're actually on the forefront, coming what we say at the African Union, African solution to African problems. So there are tremendous initiatives within the African Union that are meant to show that Africa is on the driver's seat. Africa actually is providing solutions. So it is extremely important in the conversation. We continue to empower our own initiative to demonstrate we're actually part of the solution. I think fourth, and this is equally important, is the governance of climate finance has to work for Africa. One of the biggest concerns that I hear quite often, it's not just a matter of having additional resources, but those resources need to be accessible and available to Africa, but also to African countries. So I'm hoping during the climate summit, which I have the distinguished honor in moderating a presidential panel talking about scaling up adaptation. The issue about accessibility and availability of resources will be discussed to the extent that we can actually walk away and see what reforms we need to undertake to make sure these procedures are actually accessible in a way Africa doesn't waste too much time in having resources that we hear in the billions, but are not accessible to us. I think third, fourth, or fifth, depending who's counting, one of the main takeaway of COP27 is that the only way we can address climate issues globally is through global solidarity. So the fact that we have in the room not only the government, the private sector, and civil society goes within the spirit of what was actually decided at COP27 to make sure, as we go forward, we make sure all the stakeholders actually are part of the solution. And that is why I'm confident just to hear not only the young people, but the climate justice team, but also the nonprofit, the civil society, to make sure that as we think about the solution collectively, we make sure no stakeholder is actually left behind. Last, I want to talk about innovation. And that is where we come in as an institution. And that is to say, today it can be business as usual. Climate finance, as I said earlier, is the issue about the human face. It's about people who are affected by food insecurity. It's communities that are losing their assets because of climate change. So therefore, we need to think differently. On that framework, I want to just put three things on the table as something that we're doing, which we can scale up. And I want to recognize the work that the African Union plays on this is the accessibility of early warning system and climate risk profiling, so that our decision makers can actually make informed decisions because they have access to early warning system. In today's world, with the evolution we have on climate science, there is no reason Africa should not actually have access to this technology and the way the early warning system is affordable, accessible to all Africa, so we can make informed decisions. So I'm very confident the Secretary General of the United Nations has made the call to action time and time again, that in our discussion, we should make sure that this early warning system is available and accessible to Africa. I think second, there is tremendous resources available within the insurance market. And this is where we come in as an institution, and making sure when Africans actually pull their resources together, pull their risk, they can indeed get to the insurance market and get additional resources. So your first response is actually funded by the insurance market, so no one is left behind, so you can save lives. Unfortunately, for that innovation to be scalable and accessible, the biggest challenge is the availability of premium financing, which most governments, unfortunately, because there's so many competing needs, may not be able to actually pay the premium so they can actually leverage insurance market. So I am hoping one of the solutions that we push forward at the summit in making sure we can create an Africa premium financing support and facility, so Africans who need subsidies can actually access those subsidies as well. Last but not least, the African voice needs to be heard at all levels. Not only the policymakers, the young people of Barak, the civil society, the climate justice people. Let's make sure those voices are heard when it's supposed to be heard. And I'm hoping that the organizers pay attention to the passion of young Barak to make sure at the climate summit, he will address the heads of states, but more importantly, we can go with him to COP28 so he can convey the message of Africa of hope, for we can have African solutions to African problems. So on that note, thank you very much, and thank you for the invite.